Got it going, Chris. Well, good morning.
Good
morning.
morning.
Welcome back to the Pictorial History of Epiphany. In case you missed last Sunday's class, let me reiterate what I said last week, that sometimes a picture will stay on the screen for a long time because we need to finish telling a story, or because we simply have information to give you that there are no pictures for. At other times, I'll be flipping through them too quickly. And if that's the case, just tell me to slow down. And don't wait for me to look to see your hand raised. Just yell it out and say, wait a minute, slow down a bit. Okay. The quality of the pictures will vary from being dark and fuzzy in some cases to being bright and sharp in others. Some of the activities of the congregation will be shown in detail, while others will seem neglected simply because we have few or no pictures of them. As I said last time, the most crucial missing item will be the pastor's messages to us. We have pictures of the pastor sermonizing, but very few of their words. And this, I think, is the major weakness of this course. Now, unfortunately for you, perhaps, because I happen to have been a teacher, and teachers love pop quizzes. We're going to have a pop quiz this morning. What I want you to do, I'm going to show you 9 pictures, and you're going to have to identify these pictures. Now, I realize if you weren't here last time, you won't be able to do this, but don't worry. As long as one person in the room can correctly identify the picture, we're in good shape here. Okay? All right. I'm going to start right now, I hope. Well, if I can get this to work, we'll start. Here we go. Okay, who can tell us what this building is?
Old Mansion House.
Mansion.
Overlook.
Okay, yep, this is the original mansion. This 18-room mansion that the Synod bought when they bought the property. Now this is after it was cleaned up a bit by the Epiphany members here. It didn't look quite that good when they first purchased it. Okay, let's look at the second picture. And what's that?
The garage.
The garage, right. A 6-bay garage with a 3-room apartment upstairs, which I assume was for the chauffeur originally. That's our guess. And this picture?
Pond.
The pond.
The pond, with the mansion, of course, in the back. And what we associate with that pond, of course, is Pastor Sala doing what?
The dog. Rescuing a dog.
Rescuing the dog, yes. Trapped in the pond there, couldn't get out. Okay. Now, what about this building?
The caretaker's house.
This is the caretaker's house, yeah. Okay. And this,
The church inside the mansion.
I couldn't hear.
The church inside the mansion.
Yeah, the sanctuary inside the mansion with Pastor Sala up in the front there preaching, I assume. Okay. And that held 125 folks. Now this next one might be a little tough for you. And what I want you to do is to identify this little building right here. We obviously know that that's the garage behind it. And this is, of course, the caretaker's house that you see the corner of here. But what about that little building there?
The tool shed.
Star
That's
Lodge?
the tool shed. Very good. Okay. Now this?
The first church. Or the
Okay.
the
Yeah.
church.
This is, of course, these are the plans for the new church building. And you see the campanile, the cross on this end over here. See if I can get my, and then the walkway here, and then the entrance alcove right here, and then the nave itself here, of course. And so that's what the original church looked like. And here it was, oh, what is this picture?
That's it, after it was built.
Okay, this is the church as it first looked, right? Okay, and looking inside now, what do you see that maybe you didn't notice before? Anything?
Clear glass.
Yes,
Screen.
clear glass, for one thing. There was no stained glass at this time.
And the pulpit was on the other side.
I'm sorry?
The pulpit was on the other side.
Right, now you can't see it from this picture though, but that was the case.
No corner.
The pulpit and the lectern were switched. How about in the back there? What do we see? Wrong picture here.
A screen separated.
That screen, that separates the
Pews
the
from
narthex,
yeah.
from the pews here. Okay, and notice where that narthex was placed. So when you go into our church today, you can look. Okay, how many windows do you have before the narthex?
No,
Four.
Four.
Right, and the last window, the fifth window, you'll notice, is in the narthex itself. So when you go in the church, you'll be able to see for yourself where that screen was. We have an adequate number of chairs. There's a chair here, so.
Sofas.
Have you got enough?
I think we're good, yeah.
Oops. Folks, there's a couple of chairs over there.
And the sofas.
Yeah, and obviously we've got some seats here.
Barry, I had a question from last week, with that cross in the back. Is that just a reflection, or was there actually a cross that big?
There was a cross back there. Yeah. Okay. Well, folks, that's the pop quiz, so I think you passed. This time, we're gonna turn it over to Buck Brewer, who will tell us a little bit about where we think the buildings were. Now, Buck, we're doing it now rather than at the end of this because Buck has to both go over and usher today, and he also has to read today. So he's a busy man. He's gonna have to leave a little early. Buck, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, this won't take very long. Last week we discussed the fact that there were some changes on the area of the lawn between Price Hall and the present equipment shed and between Price Hall and the Star Lodge where we are today. So you can see that in these grassy areas, there are some areas of grass that look kind of yellow. And sometimes that appears, especially during a drought. And some of the grass is more lush than other parts of the grass. In fact, sometimes there are bands of brown grass, suggesting the presence of bad soil, which might be the case if it's fill dirt around foundations or if it's the actual foundations themselves that's affecting the growth of the plants on the surface. So you can see between Price Hall and the equipment garage, there are some markings there. Now, there are many other things that would explain that. High traffic areas, there used to be a little playground here, and septic drain fields might create irregularities in the lawn, but the people that described it to me, Pastor Price and others a few years after Maxine and I began to go to church here, they thought that that was the result of the foundations of the manor house. I guess there's a way to prove that if you went to the architectural drawings with latitude and longitude recorded on the survey, and then you recruited some young aspiring Indiana Jones type from the congregation to go out with his GPS or her GPS and describe exactly where different landmarks are, and then put them on that old map, that old plat of the original property. Be an interesting project for someone to take on. But you can see the variations in the appearance of the grass, and that's thought to be due to these foundations and poor soil underneath the surface.
Thank you.
Oh, quite right. Thank you.
Okay, folks, we're now going to have a slight pause while I shift to a different PowerPoint selection here so that we can begin for today's material. So I need to get out of this, well, and back into a different PowerPoint presentation. This won't take very long, I don't think.
Barry, you have high school kids here that can help.
Pardon?
You have high school kids that can help.
If I run into trouble, I'll
They know all of
inquire
it.
on them.
We know who to ask.
We have to go up. What I'm trying to do is to get to slide 74 here. And I'm on slide 40. Can you believe we looked at 74 slides last time?
And you get very far.
Then you got 5 years.
Yeah, it was first 5 years.
One slide. There we go. Okay, we ended talking last time about fundraising in 1963 for an educational wing. Today we're going to learn that as time went on, that we did have improved additions to the buildings and congregation, and the congregation that way benefited. But that we also faced some difficulties here in the future, as we'll learn by the end of today. By April of 1963, $12,000 had been raised and the indebtedness reduced to $73,882. Sunday school attendance rose to an average of 195 that year, thus further increasing the need for the new educational building. This is an example of the crowdedness of the Sunday school at that time. Dissatisfaction with the Sunday school curriculum did cause a temporary shift to the Missouri Synod's Concordia materials, but only for a year, as new ELC materials were produced in 1964. In September of '63, Council approved a stewardship recommendation that each council member visit at least 2 families before the end of the year to answer questions on all phases of the church work. The numbers attending the 11 o'clock service led to the purchase of, in 1964, of 5 new pews that were placed on the street side of the sanctuary. As you can see, the pews on this side over here are come back further than the side pews on the other side. This necessitated the removal of that narthex screen that we saw in the other picture here, and thus basically reduced the narthex to behind the right side of the pews, plus that entrance alcove that we see in this picture here. On February 9th, 1964, the Sunday school had a record 273 attendants. And since the Sunday school in the mansion had a capacity of 209, where did the others go? Any suggestions where they might?
Here?
Yes, in this building, for one thing. Anything else?
Outside?
No. This give you a clue?
Choir loft.
They used the choir loft and also the room outside the door there, that was the choir dressing room here. In February of 1965, it was decided that a pre-Lenten visitation would be made to all members between February 14th and March 3rd to take Lenten devotional materials to them and also a schedule of Lenten events. At the end of March of 1965, the church was able to pay off its second mortgage, which freed them to begin construction of an educational wing and also a fellowship hall if they could afford it. And after getting suitable plans drawn up and I forgot to tell you that obviously they were keeping the congregation informed of how tight the classrooms for the Sunday school were. This is an example of the type of information that they were giving them. But this is an example of a congregational meeting, of course, where they made decisions such as the decision to try to build an educational wing. While church attendance in 1965 had not shown a large increase, giving did, with $10,450 more dollars given than in '64, for a total of $51,385. In March of 1966, construction began on the educational wing, and it would be dedicated in January of 1967. And this is what the new addition to the building looked like. And I've got a picture that'll show it in more detail here. So you can see the sanctuary in the background here, and the new educational wing in the foreground here. Okay. The building of this educational wing allowed the mansion to be raised. And this is a picture of the raising of the old mansion here. Internally, things seemed to be going pretty well that year. Pastor Sala, here he is preaching, made 4 of his sermons available to the congregation in the narthex. Another picture of him preaching. Now in this picture you can see definitely where's the pulpit.
On the other side.
Right, it's on the right-hand side rather than the left where it is today. That year the Roanoke College Choir gave a concert at Epiphany with members of the congregation housing the students and the young people of Epiphany, and the young people of Epiphany and Tuckahoe Presbyterian held 2 joint meetings together with about 70 kids attending each of the meetings. For the first 8 months of 1967, the Sunday school attendance went from 188 to 195, and so the Sunday school rooms were still crowded. Also, the Richmond area Lutherans of the LCA, the American Lutheran Church, and the Missouri Synod had formed a Richmond Council, which Epiphany joined in January of '68. At Thanksgiving, there was a joint service between Epiphany and Tuckahoe Presbyterian, Christ Methodist, and Sunset Hills Baptist churches. And this became an annual event. This was also the year that Epiphany member Charles Schenberger graduated from seminary. Now remember that because we're going to be coming back to Schenberger a little bit later here. Here is an examiner page advertising an adult Sunday school class from May 12th to June 30th on the book of Revelation. In the spring of '68, Pastor Sala began offering what he called home meetings with the congregation at the church. And by March, he had held 3 such sessions with 29 families attending. In May, it was announced that the Lenten book corner may be done away with because people had taken books without paying for them. By the way, there was a Lenten book corner though the next year, so I don't know if people anteed up or what happened there. In September, a Baldwin electronic organ was donated to the church, and Pastor announced that even though they had kept 2 services that summer, attendance per Sunday had dropped from 227 the year before, when they had only 1 service, to 225 this summer, where they had 2 services. But Rally Day that fall saw a record 271 attend. And of course, in Rally Days in those days, we always went out and had a big picnic on the lawn, assuming that the weather was decent here. Also that fall, the Lutheran Church women instituted an Operation Cookie program to send cookies to all Epiphany members who were in the service. The 4 churches again held their joint Thanksgiving service together, this time at Epiphany. This is an examiner page by the Stewardship Committee urging the people to pledge. They must have been fairly successful because the end of '68 saw the last $1,680 indebtedness on the parsonage paid off, thus ending Epiphany's home mission status. In February of '69, Sala let everyone know that he intended to visit all members prior to Ash Wednesday, and that in Lent, during the Wednesday service, evening services of Lent, he would center upon the words of Christ while he was on the cross. Also that fall, Pastor Sala finally gave up his editorship of the Examiner. It was understandable, since there were over 60 youth enrolled in the catechism classes. This is an example of one of the youth groups. Better example. And yet another example. Okay. The council approved a fund drive toward a fellowship hall. The youngsters in the Lutheran League did agree to help assemble the Examiner here. And here is an Examiner article advertising the upcoming Youth Sunday, when the youth would conduct the services. 1970 was a year that brought some problems. There were worries about the Sunday school attendance, which in 1965 had averaged 210. In 1966, it had gone up to 230. But it dropped in '67 to 198, and then in '68 to 181, and then in '69 to 173. Don Funk, who headed the Sunday school, said he received numerous complaints that lessons no longer teach Bible stories, and that the National Council of Churches was being run by communists. He cited an article in the Lutheran magazine to refute these charges. It said, quote, "For some peculiar reason, many church members seem to crave the excitement of taking part in fierce arguments that they know little about. They pay no attention to the careful explanations. They won't heed assurances from our most respected leaders that there are no known communists in the National Council. End of quote. In the meantime, Pastor Sala just kept plugging away. He made 239 calls upon members prior to Lent. Also in 1970, it was significant in the hiring of Mrs. Catherine Baxter as Director of Music and Christian Activities. The summer had seen Pastor Sala begin children's services during the sermons during the services, and they proved so popular that he decided to continue them. And of course, we still have children's services today, some 53 late years later, and now you know when they began. Yet another step forward occurred in November when the combined efforts of the Lutheran Church women and the Sunday school led to the collection of enough food to feed 4 families at Thanksgiving. Now, today we wouldn't regard 4 families as very many, but back then it was a start here. It was also the year that the Harts were hired as custodians. Oop, that's the food. Sorry, I missed that one. Here are the Harts. And this was a job that they would hold for 20-some years. And I've got better pictures of the Harts and what they actually did. Here's Mrs. Hart cleaning the pews, of course. And here's Mr. Hart, presumably getting the lawnmower ready to go. In 1971, Mrs. Doris Richards, the woman on the right here with the red hair, became the first woman to be elected council president. And it was also the year that, because of the increasing value of homes, that the congregation and the pastor decided it would be best to sell the parsonage and give the Salas a housing allowance to allow them to purchase a home of their own. It was also the year that Mary Grace Taylor took over editing of the Examiner. Also, the Stewardship Committee published the following time and talent sheet in the Examiner. And this was done for a number of years to get members to volunteer for the many tasks. Now, unfortunately, it was also the year when a driver coming up Monument Avenue, presumably in the middle of the night and maybe slightly inebriated, missed the fact that Monument Avenue ended. And he continued up, and believe it or not, he got up as far as this building, the Star Lodge. And he actually, at that end of the Star Lodge then, was a carport. And Mr. Hart had his car parked in there, and he actually smashed into Mr. Hart's car before stopping. And I might say at this point, he wasn't the only person that has driven up onto our property. We've had several people who have done that over the years. Not very many got as far as the Star Lodge. I don't know how inebriated you had to be to continue driving this far up. On a lighter note, new pictorial directories arrived in '71. The music ministry offered a 6-week guitar course. 57 new books were ordered for the library, which was officially dedicated on October 31st with 700 volumes in it. And here's a picture of the Stewardship Committee's attempt to explain to the congregation how the campaign would be carried out that year. An organization known as FISH had been set up by 9 West End churches in 1970 to offer emergency services to those in need. Epiphany was to provide volunteers for 2 days every 5 weeks for those needing assistance in crisis situations. But by 1972, we were told that we needed more volunteers for that service. 1972 was also the 20th anniversary of the founding of the congregation. And as a part of the celebration, the Sala's son, David, had written a short, humorous skit entitled, "I've Seen Fire, I've Seen Rain," about the early days of the church. Here is a short segment of his skit consisting of a dialogue between a newcomer, Anne, and a church member simply named Man. Quote, "The first meetings of the new congregation were rather primitive and unrefined. We now take you back in time to witness such an event. Anne, excuse me, sir, could you tell me what's going on here? Man, sure, this is a congregational meeting. Anne, well, why aren't you inside the building? Man, they're doing a lot of renovating, trying to make the place look presentable, and the chapel isn't ready yet. I'm not sure it'll ever be ready. Anne, well, why don't you meet in another part of the building? Man, they're working on all the downstairs area, and we haven't been able to break through to the upstairs yet. Anne, break through? Man, yeah, a bunch of possums have barricaded themselves in up there and they won't let anybody in. Anne, you mean you're allowing a few possums to keep half the building from you? Man, well, they got a lot of support from the squirrels and rabbits. You know, we're newcomers here and we're not too popular. They figured they settled the area first and they should have first claim on it. So we're opening up negotiations. And how are they going? Man, pretty good. Looks like we'll get the use of the buildings if we give them the trees and the bushes and maybe a little space in the attic for the sick and wounded. Why don't you come back in a few weeks? The place should have changed by then. And thank you. We'll check back with you in the future. This was tableau 1 of Ed's 5 tableau skit. There.
5.
But now, let's go back to 1972. That November, the men were asked to come in old clothes the next Sunday so that they could take up the pews so that the new red carpet that had been purchased could be put down. And it was also a time when ecumenism was in high gear, with the junior choir having sung at Tuckahoe Presbyterian Church, and again, the 4 churches at Thanksgiving holding the Thanksgiving service together, this time at Sunset Hills Baptist Church. Here's an Examiner announcement of a May picnic here, and we've got some picnic pics to show too here, if I can bring them up. 1973 started out strongly too, with the announcement that 9,000 more had been pledged than in the previous year. And Epiphany now had handbells, a sound system had been given, a new grill cloth had been installed in the organ loft, and kneelers had been given for the pews. Also at a congregational meeting in February, it was decided not to build immediately a fellowship hall at an increased cost of $110,000. Remember, if it had been built when the educational wing had been built, the cost would have been $80,000. But rather to remodel the recreational building, this one here, and to build a covered walkway between the narthex and the educational building. Also, council listed a pipe organ as a top need and estimated it would cost about $40,000. Remember that $40,000 when we get to the actual cost later on. In September, Pastor Sala announced that they would continue the practice begun that summer of having congregational members read the scriptures. And of course, we still have lay people read the scriptures yet today, as Buck is going to have to do at the 11 o'clock service, some 50 years later. In October, Anna Platts and Doris Richards were approved as the first 2 women liturgists. The choir put on a production of Camelot, which netted the new pipe organ fund some $300. Also, Epiphany and Tuckahoe Presbyterian joined together to establish an organization for seniors that came to be called the Lamplighters. I never could find out what happened to the Lamplighters. They just sort of disappear. And I found that to be the case with a lot of Epiphany organizations. I would have information on their beginning, but nothing on their ending. They just sort of went over
Fizzled out.
someplace else, I guess. They quit. It was announced that 73.5 million Lutherans in the world made the Lutherans the third leading Christian denomination in the world, behind the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholics. But one difficult note was that work on the recreational building, led by David Gorsline, was far outstripping its meager budget. And you can see where the carport is in this picture here. And of course, you can see what we have today in that place. Not only the entrance alcove, but 2 bathrooms and a kitchenette there where the carport was. So it took a fair amount of work to redo this building here. The result was, though, that council had to approve cashing in much of the church's rainy day savings to pay the cost. This is just an aside, but this is the way Pastor and other Epiphany employees signed their December Examiner that year. The beginning of 1974 saw additional difficulties. While 186 members had pledged their time and talent, the 194 financial pledges were for $72,000, while the proposed budget was for $80,566. It was explained that fewer members had increased their pledges, while more had decreased them, and the loss of 9 pledges by people who left were not made up by the 7 pledges of newcomers. Also, 83 families had not pledged, which was 25 more no pledges than the previous year. Over 200 members attended the annual meeting and supper, which was the first event held in this newly renovated Star Lodge, as it was now named. The folks were reminded that they not only had to meet the regular budget, but also they had borrowed from their reserves for the remodeling, and they needed to pay it back. Cooperation with other churches continued, and both Derbyshire Baptist and St. Matthew's Episcopal had loaned tables and chairs to Epiphany for this supper. And in February, 50 Sunday school teachers from 6 Lutheran churches attended a 4-session workshop here at Epiphany. Meanwhile, Fish now had 12 churches participating in it. Internally, various groups were using imaginative ways to get things done. In March, 350 attended the Mardi Gras celebration in the upper room to raise money for the organ fund. In April, Ken Pickles got the second floor of the educational wing painted when 35 members took him up on an offer of a steak dinner here in the Star Lodge in return for helping paint. Then in May, a dinner and floor show was held in the Star Lodge and advertised in the Examiner. It was called the Astro Lounge and included a band as well as dinner. Also in May, the Lutheran Church women sent their quilts to the Lutheran World Relief, and then in June, they finished their project of creating a chapel in the upper room. The youth held a 50s dance that year, a car wash, and in June of '74, they also went camping. Also in June, the total cost of remodeling the Star Lodge and the pump house and the walk and the covered walkway of the church was announced as $23,617. This is a picture of the pump house, and I asked Betsy Williamson if she knew where this was, and she didn't. I don't, but this was another building on campus, and apparently there was an artesian well in that pump house. And what happened to it over time, I have no idea. We don't seem to have any record of it. Okay, looking at those other things though, I don't have a really good picture of the walkway from the church alcove here back to the educational wing. The closest I could come was this picture of the front, what shall I say, the front steps here with the walkway over, not walkway, but the what do you call it, over the walkway? Yeah. And so the cover. And this is the best picture I could get, but this is not the right cover over the walkway. This cover goes out toward the cross, of course, and what they were building was a walkway the other way toward the educational building here. Okay. That fall, the Evangelism Committee announced that from now on, new members to the church would have persons in the congregation to sponsor them. And does anyone know, do we still have sponsors for new folks yet today? I don't know if we do or not, but we did back then. In January of 1975, a careers night that attracted 100 high school and college youth from 5 churches was held to hear a team of 13 professionals discuss a variety of careers. The Stewardship Committee announced that of the 185 people who had responded to the 47 categories listed on their time and talent sheet, 94 had checked that they'd be greeters, 28 as telephone callers, 28 to help in the nursery during services, 26 to help with cooking, only 18 for softball, that amazed me, and 14 to sponsor new members. It was decided to once again hold a breakfast for the 70-some members of both the council and the 7 standing committees to discuss that year's plans. And it was also decided to have 47 teams visit the home of all members to find what people thought about the strengths and weaknesses of the church. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the responses to that survey, so I don't know what the results were. And by the way, the Vietnam War also came to an end on that last day of April of 1975. The women of the 6 LCA churches in Richmond had an overnight retreat at Roslyn in May. There was no lack of social activities within the church, with the choir sponsoring a dinner for the congregation on June 1st, and Vacation Church School having a picnic for everyone on June 22nd. Also that June, the 6 LCA congregations in the Richmond area pledged $4,000 to sponsor 4 Vietnamese families, a total of 28 persons. And that September, Mary Grace Taylor resigned as editor of the Examiners so that she could write a history of First English Church, and Kathy Baxter took her place as editor. Anyone know anything about Mary Grace as to why she might want to do that? She was the daughter of J.J. Scherer, the longtime pastor of First English Church, but she had become a member of our church there. At the beginning of 1976, enough pledges had been fulfilled that Epiphany was able to contribute $1,000 above its benevolence to the Synod, and a letter of appreciation was received from President Mooney. This is a picture of President Mooney. Remember, they were called presidents, not bishops at that time. It was also the year that the Synod Convention was held in Richmond, and Dr. Robert Marshall, the national president of the LCA, came to Richmond and preached at a 3 p.m. Sunday service at the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, which the Catholics had made available. Kathy Baxter had directed the combined choirs at that convention. And it was announced at the convention that Pastor Mooney would be retiring, and that Pastor Virgil A. Moyer had been elected as the new Synod president. And by the way, it was during Moyer's term that they changed it from being Synod president to Synod bishop, which we call them now. This was followed up the following September by Pastor Sala announcing to the congregation that he would be retiring on April 3rd, 1977. But the usual Epiphany events continued to go on that fall. That rally day, the kids launched balloons with postcards attached, and one fourth grader later got one back from over 100 miles away. The youth group and the Boy Scouts alternated in serving coffee on Sundays, and the Lutheran Church women continued making quilts one day each month. 1977 was a major milestone in Epiphany's life. January was the 25th anniversary of its start. The original mission developer, Pastor Schroeder, had died on January 5th and was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His wife and two sons were still alive. His one son was a doctor in Bangor, Maine. The other had followed him into the military as a chaplain and was a colonel in the Air Force. Someone from Epiphany must have gone up to that service in order for us to have this picture here. Pastor Sala, who had had surgery in December, did not get back until the anniversary celebration at the end of January. The January Examiner went all out and contained biographical sketches of both Schroeder and Sala, and also a 4-page list of Epiphany's historical highlights. It also contained a tribute to Pastor Schroeder in the form of an article by R.C. Williamson. The celebration itself was held at the University of Richmond Commons, with two former Epiphany members participating. The Reverend Junius Coiner, who we mentioned last Sunday, shared his recollections, and the Reverend Charles Schenberger, who I mentioned today, also came and see if I can, and he was assistant at this time to the Synod president, and he served as liturgist. Also, Harvey Hudson, and this is not a very good picture, but it's from our pictorial directories of Harvey. He was a Richmond radio personality as well as an Epiphany member, and he served as master of ceremonies at that 25th meeting at UR. The March Examiner contained a form devised by the Evangelism Committee for each family to fill out to help the new pastor familiarize himself with his members, but only 50 to 60% of the congregation filled it out. Pastor Sala did retire at the end of April, and the Examiner contained a 4-page summary of his career. Secretary Cora Drescher announced that she too would retire, and Pastor Rudolph Schultz, who upon his retirement had joined the congregation back in '71, was named the vice pastor, and he was a big help in the intervening period between the retirement of Pastor Sala and the new pastor being hired. That summer, Christ Lutheran, First English, and Epiphany held vacation church school jointly together. Also in late spring, the youth groups of the area, Lutheran churches, had joined together in a huge car wash. They had washed over 600 cars. And with the money earned, they gave $402 to Offender Aid, the same amount to the Richmond Area Campus Ministry, and $603 to Lutheran Rural Relief, and they split another $603 among themselves. In the meantime, the call committee had been at work finding a pastor to replace Sala, and they thought they had located a candidate, but the person turned them down. The committee had to go back to work, and then located Pastor Ronald Fisher at St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church in Martinsburg, West Virginia. After he conducted the service on Rally Day, September 11th, he was offered the position, and in late September he accepted the call to Epiphany. Fisher had been born in Petersburg, Virginia in 1932, but at the age of 3, he had been moved to the Methodist Children's Home in Richmond. I have no idea what happened to his family here. He graduated from Thomas Jefferson High School, then went in the Navy. And then after the Navy, earned a BA at Newberry College, and then did graduate work at Roanoke College, and then went on to seminary. He had been in the ministry for 14 years when he accepted the job at Epiphany. 1977 was also a busy year for the Lutheran Church women, who made monthly visits to the Grace Manor, where in December they helped patients send Christmas cards. They helped dress dolls for the Salvation Army. They visited the Correctional Center in Goochland. They sewed quilts, made articles for the home for the aged in Salem. They knitted sweaters for migrant workers' children. They also fabricated 18 tablecloths for use at church functions. I guess we'd have to say that the Lutheran Church women were pretty busy. A new book of worship had come out in late 1977, and in the spring of 1978, an appeal to members brought $458, which purchased 57 of the 200 hymnals regarded as the minimum. Also that spring, they held the second annual Women's Sunday with Pastor Fisher sitting in the pews as the women conducted all aspects of the service. In the fall of 1978, the dialogue between the Lutherans and Roman Catholics was continued with a meeting on October 29th at First English Church. And at Thanksgiving, the service between the 4 different denominations was held again. 1978 proved to be a difficult year for Epiphany. After 25 years with the same pastor at the helm, the congregation was faced with a change in leadership. This proved to be a challenge for many, as so often happens when major changes take place. Perhaps the biggest challenge due to this change was centered around the choir and Christian activities director, Kathy Baxter. Kathy had made quite a name for herself in Pastor Sala's last years in building up the choirs and also in many other ways, including as editor of the Examiner. While the first half of 1978 seemed to go smoothly, by September, Pastor Fisher wrote in the Examiner that he was concerned that not all were receptive to his pastoral leadership. And by November, he called a special session of both council and the trustees and asked for a resolution asking Kathy Baxter to resign as of January 1st with 2 months severance pay. Council passed a resolution that she resign as of November 27th, but with 3 months severance pay. Mrs. Baxter resigned on November 21st. Council held a session open to the congregation to explain this decision. Many of the choir left Epiphany at that time, with several moving to First English, where Kathy Baxter had also moved. Anna Platts served as organist over the Christmas season. In March of 1979, there was a learning session held at Epiphany by the Synod with 9 different themes ranging from basic teacher training to helping children in crisis. In April, Council approved a report by R.C. Williamson chastising the National Council for becoming involved in politics by working against the anti-ERA forces. Council appointed R.C. to a committee along with Josephine Allman, Pastor Fisher, Julia Fries, and David Gorsline to consider the matter. A few other things intervened here. In May, Charles Cullum was named the new choir director. I don't have a picture of Charles Cullum. I looked for one and couldn't find it. That June, a picnic was held in the Star Lodge. for Pastor Schultz on the occasion of his 50th anniversary of being ordained. And this was the only picture I could find of Pastor Schultz here at that picnic here. Also, by the way, there was also, well, okay, I mentioned the picnic in the Star Lodge and this is obviously not in the Star Lodge here. Later that summer, the Star Lodge was vandalized and damaged, but the culprits were caught and convicted in juvenile court, and the church received $180 in restitution. Another $150 was received from a driver who had not stopped at the end of Monument and had driven up onto our property. And some of them have actually hit the church building and everything. In September, the committee that had been appointed on February 13th here against the LCA's involvement in anti-ERA political action announced that it had polled the congregation and that 290 persons had supported its position as 39 had opposed, and the results were forwarded both to the Synod and to the National Church. In November, a number of Lutheran Church women went to New Windsor, Maryland to see how their donations of clothes were distributed. And that Christmas, they gave gifts to the Bon Air Learning Center and to the Lutheran Children's Home. Financial difficulties continued though, with roof repairs that cost the church $8,980, almost $9,000. And it's about time. Okay, we're going to end up, right now I have one more picture to show you. This last picture has absolutely no significance except to show youthful exuberance, but I couldn't help but put it in.
Fair enough.
Next week.
That's a good one.